Jackson, Mississippi. 1961. Listen to the sound. It isn't the sound of a gun battle. It is the sound of wood striking wood, the dry, authoritative, final sound of a judge's gavel. Bang. Bang. We are inside a federal courthouse in the deep south of the United States. The air is still. The ventilation system barely works, and the smell is a mixture of stale sweat, cheap cigar, tobacco, and polished wood. But, above all, it smells of certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty that the racial hierarchy of this place is divine and eternal. On the judge's bench sits a white man, old, his face marked by the sun and a lifetime of prejudices. At the prosecution and defense tables, white men. In the jury box, white men. In the gallery, segregated white faces in the front, black faces in the back. The door opens. The sound of the hinges cuts the silence, and someone enters who shouldn't be there. Someone who is a visual affront to everything that building represents. It isn't a man. It isn't a white lawyer from the north. It is a woman tall, impeccable in her two-piece suit. Her skin is dark, ebony. Her hair is perfectly arranged. She walks down the center aisle. The sound of her high heels on the wooden floor is a new rhythm in that place. Click, click, click. Opposing counsel laughed. They whisper, "Who is this? Did the cleaning lady get lost?" The judge doesn't even look up from his papers. To them, she's not a threat. She's a joke, a curiosity. A black woman trying to practice law in Mississippi. It's like watching a dog try to play chess. They think they will crush her before lunch. They don't know who just walked into the room. Her name is Constancebaker Motley. And she didn't come to make an emotional speech. She didn't come to ask for mercy. She came to dismantle their world, brick by brick, using the only weapon they thought was their exclusive property, the law. They said a black woman couldn't bend the law. They said the Supreme Court was a men's club. They said she belonged in the kitchen. Constancebaker. Motley didn't respond with screams. She responded with lawsuits. She wrote the original complaint for Brown v. Board of Education. She got Martin Luther King out of jail. She put James Meredith in the university. She won 9 of the 10 cases she argued before the Supreme Court. This is the story of the invisible architect of civil rights. The woman who walked into the Lioness Den, armed only with a leather briefcase and a brain sharp as a diamond. And when she walked out, the lions were tamed. But to understand how a woman manages to tame lions in a southern courtroom, we need to go back. We need to see how the steel was forged. Because no one is born bulletproof. Armor is built. Let's leave the suffocating heat of Mississippi and go to the cold of Connecticut. New Haven. The 1930s. Constance was not born in the South. She didn't grow up watching lynchings in the town square or picking cotton under the whip. She was born into a family of Caribbean immigrants from the small island of Nevis. Her father was a cook at a Yale fraternity. Her mother was a community activist. They were proud people, hard-working. People who believed in education like a religion and in dignity as a birthright. She grew up in a world where racism was subtler than in the South, but equally poisonous. It wasn't a barking dog. It was a silently closed door. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper. But there was a day, the day of the spark. The day the girl realized the world was wrong. Constance, a teenager, went with friends to a local skating rink, and later to a public beach. They had money in their pockets. They were well dressed, in their Sunday best, but they were barred at the entrance. The doorman didn't even look at the tickets. He looked at their skin. "Not for your people," he said. "Members only." It was a lie. It wasn't a private club. It was racism disguised as an administrative rule. That didn't make her cry. It made her think. She didn't just see hate. She saw a technical failure in the system. If the law said she was a citizen and practice said she was inferior, then the law was being violated. She didn't want to break the doorman's face. She wanted to break the rule the doorman followed. She realized, right there, at 15 years old, that anger without strategy is just noise. But anger with a law degree, that is a revolution. She decided to be a lawyer in a time when women were secretaries, teachers, or housewives, and black men were laborers or servants. Constance looked at the law and said, "That is it. That is the sword. I will learn the language of my oppressors better than they know it." The path was brutal. She had no money, but she had a white benefactor, Clarence Blakesley, who heard her speak at a community center and was so impressed by the intellect of that young woman that he paid for her education. She went to New York University, then to Columbia Law School. Imagine Columbia in the 40s. Cold stone corridors, classrooms full of pipe smoke and rich white men, sons of judges and senators, and in their midst Constance, often the only woman, almost always the only black person. They ignored her. Professors rarely called on her, but she listened. She absorbed. She memorized every precedent, every comma, every flaw in American legal logic. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to gather ammunition. And she had a mentor, the giant Thurgood Marshall, the head of the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, the most brilliant legal mind of his generation in future Supreme Court justice, saw that young student. He didn't see a girl. He didn't see someone to fetch coffee. He saw a soldier. He saw an analytical mind that could dissect an argument in seconds. He hired her, and Constance entered the war room, the NAACP war room. We have to zoom in on this room. New York, NAACP offices. Don't imagine a fancy law firm with mahogany panels and views of Central Park. Imagine a trench, papers stacked to the ceiling, thick cigarette smoke, the sound of typewriters rattling day and night like machine guns on a front line, the smell of reheated coffee and stress. There, brilliant men shouted strategies to overthrow segregation. Robert Carter, Jack Greenberg, Thurgood Marshall, and in the middle of them, Constance, calm, meticulous, relentless. While the men made the great speeches and gave interviews, Constance wrote the drafts. She wrote the complaints. She did the boring, arduous, invisible research that won the cases. In 1950, they were preparing the final attack against school segregation, the case that would change the world. Brown v. Board of Education. History remembers Thurgood Marshall arguing the case before the Supreme Court. He was the voice. But who wrote the original complaint? Who wrote the initial draft that argued for the first time that segregation caused irreversible psychological damage to black children? Constancebaker Motley. She was the invisible architect. She drew the blueprints for the legal atomic bomb that blew up Jim Crow. But writing papers in New York was safe. It was the real test. The trial by fire was going down south. Leaving the ivory tower and stepping into the red mud of Mississippi Alabama, Georgia, and that is where the legend was born. That is where Constancebaker Motley stopped being just a brilliant lawyer and became a moving target. Let's talk about the logistics of terror. When Constance traveled south to defend her clients, she didn't travel like a normal lawyer. She was a black woman in an expensive suit, driving rental cars down rural roads where the only law was that of the local sheriff and the Klan. She couldn't stop at hotels. Hotels were whites only. She couldn't eat in restaurants. She couldn't use the bathrooms at gas stations. Imagine the physical stress having to hold the urge to go to the bathroom for 6-7 hours while mentally preparing for a federal trial, having to eat sandwiches in the back seat of the car. And there was real danger, physical violence. There were nights when she called home to her husband and young son in New York and heard only heavy breathing on the other end of the line or explicit death threats. "We're going to get you, Motley. You're not leaving Mississippi alive. We know where your son goes to school." On one occasion, in Mississippi, she stayed at the home of Medgar Evers, the local civil rights leader. It was the only safe place. They had dinner, discussed strategy, laughed to relieve the tension. Days after she left, Medgar Evers was assassinated with a shot in the back at the door of that very house. His blood stained the driveway where Constance had stood hours before. The bullet could have been for her. She knew it. Everyone knew it. But the next morning, she put on her suit, fixed her hair, applied her lipstick, and walked into the courtroom with her head held high. Her courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the absolute, icy, disciplined control over fear. Let's go back to 1961. The James Meredith case. This was the hardest round of her career. James Merritt, an Air Force veteran, wanted to enter the University of Mississippi Ole Miss, the sacred temple of Southern white supremacy. The state governor, Ross Barnett, said on television, "Never. We would rather close the university than let a Negro in," the dean said. "Over my dead body." The KKK said, "We will kill whoever tries." Thurgood Marshall was busy with other cases. Other lawyers were understandably afraid. Constance raised her hand. "I'll go. I'll handle this." She arrives at the federal courthouse in Jackson. The room is full. The air conditioning is broken. The heat is oppressive. The hate is palpable. An acidic smell in the air. The judge, Sidney Mice, is a staunch sick. He doesn't even look at her. During the hearings, he turns his chair, literally turning his back on her while she speaks. It is a calculated, childish, and brutal act of disrespect designed to destabilize her, to make her lose her cool, so he could charge her with contempt. But Constancebaker Motley does not lose her cool. Never. She had what colleagues called a poker face. Her face was a mask of impenetrable serenity. The judge turns his back. "Fine." She speaks to his back. She speaks to the stenographer. She speaks to history. The defense lawyers, a team of 12 white men, shout, interrupt, call her names, try to intimidate her physically and verbally. She waits for them to finish, adjusts the papers on the bench, and with a monotonous, almost bored voice, cites the jurisprudence. E or honor, or the precedent of Suite V. Painter is clear and leaves no room for interpretation. ... Double quotes, she doesn't play their game. She plays chess. Her strategy was brilliant. Let the racists talk. Let them lie, and then catch them in their own lies. There is a key moment in the trial. The university registrar takes the witness stand. He swears to tell the truth. He says, with a cynical smile, that James Meredith was not rejected because he was black. "Oh, no, not at all," says the dean. "We don't see color here. He was rejected because he is emotionally unstable. He is a troublemaker." Constance stands up. She walks over to the dean. She is taller than him in her heels. With her calm surgical voice, she begins to dissect the lie. "Mr. Registrar, you say he is unstable, but here are his military records." She places a paper on the table. "He was decorated for good conduct. Here are his grades from another university." Another paper. "Excellent grades. Here are letters of recommendation from 5 military chaplains." Another paper. Question after question. Document after document. She corners the man. She doesn't scream. She doesn't perform. She performs an autopsy of his hypocrisy in real time. By the end of the testimony, the dean is sweating profusely. He stammers. He contradicts himself. He admits, inadvertently, that they never accepted a Negro. The room goes silent. She didn't need to raise her voice to destroy him. She used the truth as a scalpel and bled the defense to death. She fought this case for months. Did she win in the district court? No. The local judge denied it, ignoring all evidence. But she knew that would happen. She was playing the long game. She already had the appeal ready in her briefcase. She appealed to the Fifth Circuit, then to the Supreme Court, and she won. The United States Supreme Court ordered the immediate admission of James Meredith. The University of Mississippi must accept him. The day James Meredith entered the university was a day of war. Literally. September 30th, 1962. Riots. Burning cars. Molotov cocktails. President Kennedy had to send 30,000 federal troops and marshals to Oxford, Mississippi. There were gunshots. Tear gas covered the campus. 2 people died that night. Journalists were beaten. But the next morning, amidst the smoke and debris, James Meredith walked to the registrar's office and enrolled. He got in, and who was metaphorically beside him, holding the iron door open with the force of the pen and the law? Constancebaker Motley. She wasn't physically there to take the bricks, but without her mind, the army wouldn't have had the authority to march. But the fight didn't stop. The phone rang again. Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. The year of fire. Martin Luther King Jr. was in jail. He had led peaceful protests. The police of Will Connor, the racist commissioner, had responded with savagery. They released attack dogs on protesters. They turned high-pressure fire hoses on children, dragging them across the asphalt. King was arrested and placed in solitary confinement. The movement was in critical danger. If King stayed in jail too long, the momentum would die. Bail money had run out. Morale was low. They needed him out to lead, but no local lawyer could get him out. The Birmingham judges were part of the racist machine. They refused to sign the papers. Constance flew to Birmingham. She entered the jail, saw King. He was exhausted, dirty, demoralized. He had just written the famous letter from Birmingham jail on the margins of a newspaper, but he was still behind bars. She went to the courthouse. Once again, a room full of hostile white men. The judge tried to block bail, tried to use obscure technicalities about parade permits. Constance knew the law better than they did. She knew the law better than the judge himself. She argued that the arrest violated due process rights under the 14th Amendment. She cited federal precedents that local judges purposely ignored. She maneuvered. She threatened immediate federal intervention from the Department of Justice. She cornered the judge legally. If he didn't release King, he would be committing a judicial error that would cost him his career. She succeeded. King walked out. He walked out of that cell to march on Washington and say, "I have a dream." But it was Constancebaker Motley who picked the lock. She didn't stop. She represented the Freedom Riders, young people who traveled by bus to challenge segregation and were beaten and burned alive in their vehicles. She represented children who were expelled from school for protesting. In total, she argued 10 cases before the United States Supreme Court. 10. Stop to think about the magnitude of this. Most brilliant lawyers, the elite of the elite, dream of arguing one case before the Supreme Court in their entire lives. She argued 10, being a woman, being black, and she won 9 victories. 9 nails in the coffin of segregation. Every time you see a black student in a university in the South, Constance was there. Every time a protest is protected by law and the police cannot arrest arbitrarily, Constance was there. Every time a prisoner has the right to effective counsel, Constance was there. But there was a cost. The cost that doesn't appear in law books. The cost of being a mother. She had a young son, Joel, while she was in the South dodging bullets and shouting in courtrooms. Her son was in New York, growing up with an absent mother. Guilt consumed her. Am I a bad mother? She asked herself on lonely nights in strange guest rooms. Is it worth it? But then she looked at the black children in the South, children without schools, children without a future. And she knew she was fighting for her own son's future, too. She sacrificed her family's normalcy so that other families could be normal. In 1964, her career changed. She entered politics, became the first black woman elected to the New York State Senate, then the first woman president of the borough of Manhattan. But her final destiny was the gavel. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson, impressed by her tenacity, nominated her to be a federal judge. The first black woman in history to hold that position. The Senate confirmation was a war. The racist Southern senators, the same men whose laws she had destroyed in court, tried to block her. Senator Eastland of Mississippi led the charge. They delayed the nomination for 7 months. They called her communist, called her radical, said she had bias against whites and couldn't be impartial. The irony was palpable. Men who built careers on prejudice, accusing her of prejudice. They were afraid of her, afraid to see that motley woman with the power of a federal judge, afraid of having to stand when she entered the room. But they couldn't stop her. Her competence was too great. The support was too strong. She was confirmed. Imagine the moment. 1966. Constancebaker Motley, the granddaughter of slaves by racial heritage. The girl who is barred from the public beach steps up to the bench. She puts on the black robe, the same robe white men used to oppress her people for centuries. She sits in the high chair above everyone. She picks up the gavel. Bang! Bang! The sound now belongs to her. The law now speaks through her mouth. As a judge, she continued the revolution, but now from inside the system. She presided over landmark cases. She ruled that female reporters had to have access to professional sports team locker rooms, guaranteeing equality in journalistic work. She ruled in favor of prisoners demanding humane treatment, reminding the state that being incarcerated doesn't mean losing one's humanity. She mentored a new generation of lawyers and judges. But here is the silent tragedy. The world knows Martin. The world knows Malcolm, knows Rosa, knows Thurgood. Their names are on avenues, on holidays, on postage stamps. But Constance, she was largely forgotten by popular history books. Maybe because she didn't make fiery speeches to crowds in stadiums. Maybe because her work was done in libraries and stuffy rooms, writing 100-page legal documents that no one reads. Maybe because she was a woman in a movement dominated by men who loved the spotlight and cameras. Her work wasn't glamorous. It was structural. And structures, when they work well, become invisible. But look at the present. Look at Kamala Harris, the first vice president. Look at Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman on the Supreme Court. They didn't appear out of nowhere. They are standing on the shoulders of Constancebaker Motley. When Ketanji Brown Jackson was nominated to the Supreme Court in 2022, she said in her speech, "I am here because Constancebaker Motley paved the way. Our birth is the same. Our date is the same. Constance died in 2005, but her legacy is concrete. It is steel. It is law. She taught us that revolution is not made only with shouts in the streets and signs. It is made with intellect. It is made with obsessive preparation. It is made by knowing the enemy's rules better than he does. She taught us that a black woman, armed with the Constitution and a sharp mind, is the most dangerous force racism has ever faced. Now, I ask you, what is the battle you are avoiding because you think you don't have the right weapons? What is the room where you think you don't belong? Do you think you need to be taller, richer, or have the right profile? Remember Constance entering that Mississippi courtroom, heels clicking on the wood, surrounded by hate, alone, fearless, prepared, and remember how she left victorious with the law in her hand. Don't accept being told your place. Your place is where your competence puts you. If the door is locked, don't knock asking please. Dismantle the lock. Use intelligence as leverage. If this story changed your perspective on what power is, if you believe that true heroes often don't wear capes but carry briefcases and black robes, share this video. Let's make the name Constancebaker Motley as known as the men she saved from prison. Comment below. #grateful, because we all, in some way, owe a bit of our freedom to this woman's mind. Thank you for watching. History is made by those who write the rules, not just those who follow them. Be the architect of your own justice. See you at the next verdict. Ouchie. Ouchie.